globe. You and I are doing it right now, and you and I both know that when you speak on the phone and you're listening carefully to that person, you're not just listening to the words, you're listening for the intonations in speech, you're feeling the emotions of the words they're using, and that couples directly into your neurology. And they've done tests in many universities where they would have one person in one room reading a paragraph and actually sending the thoughts to the person in the other room, and the other person picks it up. There was a psychologist when I had gone into military intelligence in the Navy that tested me, and I got 10 out of 10. He just sent a thought, and I would receive it. So I found out early that I was fairly well tuned in some areas, but I didn't know what to do with all of that. Well, when I was in high school, there were a couple of things that happened I can't go into, but I will tell you this. I specifically stayed out of the yearbook so that there was no picture of me in the high school yearbook, because I knew what I was going to do before I went in, and before I knew I was going to be inducted, which is something of an odd occurrence. But when I went into service, out of several thousand, there was about 6 or 7 of us that were selected and given an oath that no one else in the military was given. And it's an oath that basically takes care of the issues of the folks in the New World Order, because at that point they knew they had already taken over large portions of government. Almost every single community has groups of Masons who watch over the affairs of the commerce in the area, and they report back, and there's a chain of command that goes all the way up, way, way, way past the president. He's just the low end of the totem pole. And not to besmirch all of the Masons, because some of them are extraordinarily good people down at the bottom, but you get all the way up to the top, and there's only a few of the good guys up there. Most of that top end is pretty well rotten, and that's where many of the things happen in our country that shouldn't, especially in the legislative channels. And it doesn't take much time and research to find that out and prove the case. But at any rate, I went in, I took the oath, and my job was interesting because I was sent out because of my, I'm not sure why. I think they knew I took the oath seriously, so I was given an assignment without a handler, which, if you know what that means, basically there was no oversight on what I did. I was left to my conscience, and what I dictated should be done. And I just kept it in line with the assignment, and to this day I have not activated fully. So that's what happened getting me into there. But while I was in there, something happened, and I'm not sure what, but many years later, and what was interesting was I started experiencing some really aberrant behavior. I became a guy who I was not. I lost almost all of my abilities and my connections in the psycho arena and many of the things that I could do as a child, and I couldn't understand why it was going. It just simply left, and I couldn't even access it in my mind. And then many, many years later, after a lot of misbehavior, after I'd gotten out, I realized that something was amiss, and you probably saw the History Channel episode where they took the implant out of my leg, which, you know, they made it out as if I was abducted by UFOs, and I don't know if that's the case. I probably would lean more towards military intelligence, put it in there to track my whereabouts, because they figured out what I was there for, because my job was to watch what they were doing. So, well, that was part of the job. But at any rate, they took this thing out, and as soon as they took this thing out, my vision improved, my health began to rebound, and I immediately got hold of a fellow I heard on Coast, Major Ed Dames, and I learned remote viewing, which helped me rebuild the shattered portions of my right brain functionality. And that started making tremendous connections, and then all of a sudden, I began solving puzzles and formulas and things that I never expected to. I would have never thought I would be in the health field, and I would never have thought I could do things like consciousness projection. So that's what really happened, and that's what brought me into today, getting into the health field, because back in 2003, before we took out the implant, I had basically my system shut down because when I was in the military, I was exposed to depleted uranium while I was on the Kennedy. We had a phalanx misfire, and it just powdered everybody with depleted uranium. So if anybody's from the Kennedy, please contact me on my website. It's www.jeftech.net, and let me know so I can help you see how to get rid of the heavy metal poisoning and get your health back, because it took me a long time to learn how. But at any rate, what had happened was between the depleted uranium, getting about 12 to 15 different shots of vaccines when we were headed into Africa, I got vaccine poisoning, and then later gamma radiation damage, and of course mercury poisoning when I had my fillings taken out. They evidently let the dam slip. So all of my immune system shut down, and I had about 2 weeks to live. I was bedridden already, and I called this doctor, Dr. Tunsky, that I had read about in a health journal. And Gary was a godsend because he basically took some tests and showed it was heavy metal poisoning for the most part and some other things. And he brought me back with nothing but nutrition and detox. And so he got me back to where I was standing and functioning, but there was a couple of years left of rebuild work to do because literally everything shut down. I was in renal failure some of the time. Many of my systems had shut down. They would come back up and shut down. So at this point, now I'm back. I'm healthy enough to function. I can now breathe regularly instead of in pain all the time. And even though I was still bedridden, I was up and running enough where I could get up a couple hours a day and start rebuilding the systems. So it took about a year and a half to learn to walk again. It took, 30 days to get my voice back. And after that, it was simply a matter of keeping at it and trying to rebuild the system. So I decided I'd get into looking into what the latest technology was, because I'm a technology guy. I was electronics trained in the military, and they did one heck of a job training me, too. So I started looking. I got into sound work using low-frequency modalities, and I was able to rebuild some systems, but I could never get it all done. So I started getting into the detox end of it that Gary started me on, and I started learning it, and I realized that was the magic bullet for getting the memory back, because it turns out your brain is loaded with all these toxins, and once you wipe them out and get them out of your system, memory returns, things you thought you lost. So that's basically what brought me to where I am today.
That's amazing. Your whole story in general. I mean, we get so many people on here sharing stories that are so much like yours in a lot of ways. I mean, people that go through near-death experiences and things like this. I interviewed the executive director of the Monroe Institute in Virginia, which I'm sure you're well aware of. I actually interviewed Paul Rodemaker, and he had a near-death experience which changed his life. There's just so many things to talk about. On your website, you say that you have these articles on autism and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and cancer. I mean, so many different things that are beneficial for the listeners. And, you know, you mentioned your website. Also on the home page of the radio show, people should be able to click on your picture there and get straight to your website. There's a direct link to it, and that'll be in the archive as well.
And I put your link on my Facebook page to make sure people find your website, because you've got so many good interviews. People need to hear this information, because until they do, they don't have enough data to not say, oh, come on. But once they hear the interviews and they listen to the voices of the people, they'll be able to tell whether they're BSing or not. And you've got some great people on there.
Yeah, I mean, people, like I said earlier in the show, you know, people with these types of outstanding credentials that are coming on a show like mine, somebody who never expected to be a radio host or anything like that, you know, I come across this information and I felt a calling myself to take part in sharing this information and like Project Camelot, providing a place for people to share their story. You know, and there's so many people out there now doing radio shows and blogs and things like this. I don't expect everybody to follow me. You know, you have to really listen to many different sources, and everybody needs to